Thank you very much. I mean, as you can see, I mean, this is wonderful writing, and it's a novel which is in turn romantic, very funny, and very well documented. I mean, I learned an awful lot. I mean, I have to say, I was totally ignorant of Ceylonese history, and I really enjoyed learning so much about it. But can you tell us how you came to write this novel?
Well, really, it started with a very small germ of an idea. My husband is Sri Lankan, and I didn't really know anything about his background, and I used to get him to tell me stories about his family and his upbringing. And these stories came out in tiny little bits and pieces. And the first story was about a family scandal about a woman a long time ago who was married and met a young man, and they had an affair. And we had some old photographs which were on the wall in black and white, and one or two of these people appeared in the photographs. And I found myself just standing in front of them thinking, you know, what were your lives like? This was quite a pressure cooker kind of a relationship, conducted within the middle of the family circle, so very difficult and very secretive, and probably more passionate because of that, but also quite destructive in the long run. And then, sometime later, Rohan mentioned to me, this is my husband, Rohan, a comment that his father had made about the involvement of Buddhist monks in the politics of the 1950s. And that was quite a shock, because like a lot of Westerners who don't know an awful lot about Buddhism, I certainly didn't at the time, I assumed it was very much a religion of peace and neutrality. And the more I started to read about Ceylon, the more I realised that actually the strain of Buddhism in Ceylon at that time was quite aggressive. It was very politically involved, and there was, you know, an extraordinary relationship between Mr. Bandaranayake and a particularly powerful Buddhist abbot that ended up with a political assassination. It was really quite an extraordinary story, but I had to dig quite deep to get it.
And there was also, obviously, also possibly a relationship with a female minister,
yes,
but which you kind of skirt around.
It's very difficult. I had to go back to trial records of a murder trial, actually, to get as much information as I did. And it was hinted that there was a very intimate personal relationship between these two people. Her name was Vimala Vijayawardena, and the monk, who later became the abbot of a very influential monastery, had really almost been brought up in her house. Her husband was a lot older than she was, and he was about the same age as Vimala. And they partly grew up together. They had a very close relationship. It was hinted that they had an affair. The interesting angle on that is that when Rohan's mother came over to visit us once, I mentioned these two people, and she said, "Oh, Vimala used to live at the end of my road." And I actually saw the abbot travelling in a Western suit, in a car, wearing a big black hat, going down to visit this lady at night. So we can draw our own conclusions from that. But it was never actually, it was hinted at, but never actually specifically. They denied it hotly, but they were accused of this relationship.
I have a lot of other questions for you, but also quite a few questions which cross over. So I think that I will ask Maggie to give us her readings, maybe starting with Kiscardi Girl, which is a memoir. Standing.
Yes.
Now, one thing I found interesting in both your books, I mean, you talked about the magic realism in your book, and you read the passage with the God. But what I found really interesting is you both write about a tradition where the supernatural is always present. I mean, it's in the stories you hear. I mean, the ghost of your father. I mean, the gods. And I wondered if you could maybe both talk about that a little, maybe why you decided to have that supernatural element and make not just the gods, but there's also a prince and his the women that loved him and who are paintings on the wall of a palace, and who appear as characters in the book. So if you could talk a little about this.
Well, I suppose really in the book, if I summed up the book at all, I'd say it was all about search for identity on every level. And post-independence in 1947 from the British, Ceylon started to try and create its own identity. And at first it was very quiet. A lot of the politicians were very Western educated, and it just seemed to be British Empire, continuing under another name. And then 7 or 8 years in, there was a sort of upsurge, there was a revival of Buddhism and a review of Buddhist religion. One of the prime ministers actually lost an election because he called the election in a year which was a big Buddhist celebration. He offended so many people that he just, there was no way he was going to win the election. And there was a lot of looking backwards. Ceylon was on the brink of becoming a modern state, and all of a sudden it took a wrong direction. It took a different direction with the rise of Sinhalese nationalism, which was linked to Buddhism because the majority of the Sinhalese are Buddhist, and there was a Buddhist revival going on at the same time. This search for identity, religious and political, and for a national identity, took the form of looking back very much to the past and looking back to legends, such as there was a legend of Prince Vijaya, who actually was, the legend appears in one of the very old chronicles from the 6th century, and Prince Vijaya is regarded as the founder of the Sinhalese race, and for a lot of quite extreme Sinhalese politicians, this was proof that they had a right to rule the island. What they forgot was that also in this legend, Prince Vijaya came from India. It was really, up until this point, Ceylon had been such a crossroads for culture. But in this search for national identity, it was a sort of a closing of the doors on all foreign influences and a looking back to a period very, very far back in the past where there had been a purely Sinhalese culture. And that's really why all these legends, politicians were actually quoting these legends and religious beliefs in political speeches as if they were fact. Mythology to them was like historical fact is to us.
But why did you decide to make one of the god, Hunyam? Why did you decide yourself to make him a character? I mean, he appears in the books throughout.
Yes, I thought actually it's very difficult when you're writing a political or historical fiction not to make it sound like a textbook. And I was trying to create the setting for it, and every time I wrote it down, I get a chunk of historical text, and it was just wrong. And I just suddenly hit on the idea of using this mouthpiece to try and get a setting for the religious ideas and the political ideas and everything that was going on, and to characterise it in the form of this man, this god called Hunyam. And as soon as I did that, it worked.
Yeah,
it slotted into place, yes. Yeah, so that was a solution to a problem, really.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask you both a final question, and then I'm open. I have to say, Truda, when I was finishing your book, and the end of the book is really incredibly gripping. I mean, this is basically all hell is happening. I mean, the society is bursting. People are killing each other in the most horrible way. It's race, religion. I mean, it's really terrible. In your book, Maggie, you concentrate on. I mean, this is your view, and you're a teenage girl, and even though there is political turmoil in the background, this is not what you are interested in, and you are concentrating more on your story. But we know that something bad is also happening, and this is why also you end up leaving your country and moving to England. And I found myself, I mean, walking into Tesco and looking at all the faces around me, which were all kind of different shades, and thinking, that's amazing, we live together at peace. And this is also the impression you have when you read the Your Canterbury Tales. But I love all these stories of people coming from everywhere and living together. And I would like to know your views. I mean, you know, how, when you were writing this, I mean, and you were from the comfort of here, how you saw it, and also, I mean, you know, comparing the two societies, the two worlds. I mean, you know, my picture might be a bit too rosy, I know, and I know there have been riots here as well, but still not anything like what happened. So, I mean, I don't know who wants to go first, but.
I suppose it's very interesting. You said that the stories had been told, and they obviously have with Guyana. But I came across this piece of history that actually really very few of the history books mentioned at all, because it was quite embarrassing for the regime that's still in place. And as I studied history at university, it really grabbed me. But as I read it, I thought, this could really happen anywhere. And there were, to me, a lot of similarities, a lot of patterns that were almost reminiscent of, you know, the persecution in Nazi Germany, and how the Second World War broke out, and how, you know, one minute people would be living next door to each other as friends or friendly neighbours, and then the next minute everything would fall apart and they'd be at each other's throats. And it was quite interesting. I do really think that that is a message that we've all got to not forget. As I was trying to explain the history behind the book to somebody who I regarded as being fairly well educated, and her comment to me was really shocking. She said, well, they're those kind of people, I suppose. It couldn't happen here. And I thought, well, you know what? In the wrong circumstances, it could happen anywhere. And I do think, you know, my feeling is that we will have to be so vigilant to and see these patterns in world history, and actually not put ourselves on a pedestal and think it can't happen to us, because it can. It's circumstances that push people into those, you know, terrible positions of bloodshed, or, you know, decide whether they're fortunate enough to live as we are now in enjoying peace and quiet and creativity.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly made me appreciate it when I was reading the book.